4 years ago, I got a bonus, $6,200 after tax, sitting in my account on a Friday afternoon. I remember exactly how it felt, which was like being handed permission. 10 weeks later, I could not have told you where a single dollar of it went. Not one. There was no vacation, no purchase I could point to, nothing I could hold up and say, that is what $6,000 became. It had simply been absorbed by an ordinary life that quietly expanded to meet it. That same month, I read something that genuinely stopped me. Japanese households keep roughly half of their financial assets in plain cash and deposits. American households keep somewhere around $1.08. Now, most Americans hear that and think it sounds financially unsophisticated. Cash earns nothing. That money should be working. But sit with what it actually means. A country with a lower median household income than the United States has spent decades quietly holding an enormous cushion, while the richest country in history holds almost none. That gap is not about income. It is about 10 habits, and almost none of them are taught here. Because the relationship Japan has with money is close to the mirror image of the American one. In the United States, money is expressive. It announces things. A raise becomes a car. A promotion becomes a bigger apartment. Success becomes something you can photograph. Spending is how we tell each other we are doing well. In Japan, money is structural. It is not a message. It is a foundation you build quietly underneath a life, and displaying it too openly is considered slightly graceless. Not immoral, not shameful, just clumsy, the way talking loudly on a train is clumsy. And that single difference produces completely different outcomes because it changes what a dollar is for. Here are the American numbers as they stood going into 2026. The personal savings rate sat near 4.5%, roughly half the long-run historical average. Around 60% of Americans were living paycheck to paycheck, including about 40% of people earning six figures. More than half could not cover a surprise $1,000 expense out of savings. And total household debt crossed $18.8 trillion. We are not earning less than we used to. We are keeping less. Over the next 30 minutes, I am going to walk you through 10 Japanese money habits. Some of them have names that will be new to you. All of them are older than any budgeting app. Most of them are older than the modern banking system. And every single one of them can be run by an ordinary American household starting this week without earning a single extra dollar. None of them require you to be frugal in the way Americans usually mean the word, which is to say miserable. 2 quick promises before we start. First, none of this requires you to move to Japan, learn Japanese, or adopt anything that would look strange to your neighbors. Every habit here translates directly into American money, American banks, and American tax rules. Second, I am not going to ask you to cut coffee. The entire logic of these habits is that they work on the decisions that happen a few times a year and quietly determine everything, not on the ones that happen every morning and determine almost nothing. Let us start with the foundation. The first word is Chochiku, and it simply means savings. But in Japanese financial life, it does not describe an activity. It describes a condition. You do not do Chochiku. You have it, the way a building has a foundation. The scale of it is genuinely hard for Americans to picture. Japanese households hold roughly half of their financial assets in cash and bank deposits. The National Postal Savings Institution grew into one of the largest holders of household deposits anywhere on Earth, built almost entirely on ordinary people putting ordinary amounts away, decade after decade, at interest rates that were frequently close to zero. Zero. They kept doing it anyway. And there is a history underneath that behavior which is worth knowing, because it explains why the habit runs so deep. Japan spent the better part of 3 decades in an environment of flat or falling prices. In that world, cash was not a wasting asset. A yen left alone in a drawer for 10 years bought roughly what it had bought at the start, and sometimes slightly more. An entire generation of Japanese households learned correctly that holding cash was not a mistake. That matters, And I am going to come back to it near the end of this video, because it is also the place where copying Japan blindly would genuinely hurt you. But set the interest rate aside for a moment, because it was never the real reason the habit works. Now put the American number next to it. American households hold something in the neighborhood of $1.08 in cash and deposits. The rest is in markets, in home equity, in retirement accounts. And on paper, that looks smarter. Cash loses to inflation. Every financial commentator in America will tell you that holding cash is a drag on returns. And strictly speaking, they are right. But here is what that argument leaves out, and it is the entire point. The purpose of the cash fortress was never return. It was never supposed to compete with the stock market. Its purpose is to make sure you are never forced to sell anything, ever, at a moment somebody else chose for you. That is it. That is the whole function, because the single most expensive thing that happens to ordinary investors is not picking the wrong fund. It is being forced to liquidate at the bottom because the transmission went, or the hours got cut, or the diagnosis came. The market recovers. The person who sold into it does not. Think about someone I will call Curtis. Curtis is 44. He has around $110,000 invested and about $1,100 in checking. In March, his employer cuts his overtime, and 2 weeks later, his water heater fails. He sells $9,000 of investments to cover the gap at a moment when his fund happens to be down 18%. He did not lose $9,000. He converted a temporary paper loss into a permanent one, and he removed $9,000 from 30 more years of compounding. At a long-run average return, that single forced sale cost him somewhere in the range of $60,000 to $70,000 by the time he is 70. The cash fortress exists to make that phone call unnecessary. So the American translation is simple and it is boring. Build 6 months of actual expenses, not income, expenses, in a high-yield savings account at a bank you do not have a debit card for. Do not invest it. Do not optimize it. Do not let anyone talk you out of it because it is earning less than the market. It is not supposed to earn. It is supposed to hold the line. The second habit is built into the Japanese pay structure itself, and once you see it, you will wonder why we do not do it. Most Japanese full-time employees receive large lump sum bonuses twice a year, typically in early summer and in December. These are not the token American holiday bonus. They frequently run to the equivalent of 1 to several months of salary, and they are an expected, planned part of annual compensation. Now here is the cultural piece. The default treatment of that money is not to spend it. It is to bank it, use it to clear the year's obligations, or move it straight into savings. The bonus season and the savings season are the same season. Compare that to what happens in America with our closest equivalent, which is the tax refund. The average federal refund runs somewhere around $3,000. And surveys consistently find that a substantial share of Americans have spent all or nearly all of it within a couple of months, usually on nothing they can later identify. It arrives, it feels like found money, and it evaporates. The mechanism underneath both behaviors is the same, and psychologists have a name for it: mental accounting. We treat money differently based on where it came from rather than what it can do. Money that arrives in a lump, that we did not budget for, that feels like a gift rather than a wage, gets spent far more freely than the identical dollars in a paycheck. The Japanese habit works because it removes the decision entirely. The bonus was never in play. It has a destination before it has an arrival date. Take a woman I will call Priya. She gets a $3,000 refund every spring and a $2,000 bonus every December. For 6 years, she has treated both as bonus money, in the American sense. Nothing dramatic, just a slightly bigger Christmas, a weekend away, a couch. Her neighbor does the same job and gets the same money, and has a standing rule that both go into a brokerage account within 72 hours of landing, untouched. $5,000 a year for 20 years, at a long-run average return of about 7% after inflation, comes to roughly $205,000. Neither of them earned more than the other. One of them just never made the decision twice a year. So the American translation: write down, today, before it exists, where the next windfall goes. Tax refund, work bonus, insurance payout, the money from selling a car. Decide the destination in advance and set a rule for how fast it has to get there. 72 hours is a good number because it is long enough to be reasonable and short enough that the money never becomes part of your visible balance. You are not depriving yourself. You are just refusing to negotiate with yourself twice a year. The third habit starts with children, which is exactly why it works. At New Year in Japan, children receive Otoshidama, money given in small decorated envelopes by parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. Depending on the family and the child's age, the total can add up to a meaningful sum. It is one of the most anticipated moments of the Japanese year if you are 8 years old. And here is the part that matters. The cultural default is that a significant portion of it goes into the child's bank account. Not all of it, and not always, but the expectation exists, and it is normal. A Japanese child frequently opens their first real relationship with a bank before they can do long division. Now think about how American children learn about money, because for most of them, the answer is that they do not. Financial literacy is not universally required in American schools. A child's first substantial encounter with a financial institution is often a student loan or a credit card offer arriving in a dorm mailroom at 18, from an industry that has spent considerable money studying exactly how 18-year-olds make decisions. The mechanism here is not really about the money. The sums are small. It is about which action feels normal. A child who has deposited money every January for 12 years does not experience saving as sacrifice. It is not a virtue they have to summon. It is simply what happens to money. The habit was installed before there was any counter-argument, and habits installed that early do not require willpower later, because they never became a choice in the first place. Consider a family I will call the Okonkwo's. They have 2 kids, and starting when the older one turned 5, every birthday and holiday cash gift got split. Half to spend that week. No questions, no lectures. Half into an account with the child's name on it, which they look at together twice a year. By the time the older child is 18, that account is not life-changing. It might be $4,000 or $5,000, but the child has now performed the act of saving 30-something times, has watched a number grow without doing anything to it, and understands compounding as a thing that happened to them rather than a formula on a whiteboard. That child will make different decisions at 25 than a child who never did it, and the difference across a lifetime is not $4,000. It is closer to everything. The American translation. Split every gift of money a child receives, in front of them, the day it arrives. Half is theirs to spend immediately with zero commentary from you, which is what keeps it from feeling like a punishment. Half goes into an account they can see. Open the account with them, not for them, and check it together twice a year. No more. This is not supposed to be a chore. It is supposed to be a small, pleasant ritual, and rituals are what survive. The fourth habit is a phrase that describes an entire philosophy of buying, and it may be the most useful one on this list for anyone who feels like they spend too much on ordinary things. The phrase is Muji-ru shi ryohin, and it translates almost literally as no brand quality goods. It emerged in Japan in 1980 as a deliberate reaction against a consumer economy where the logo had become the product. The idea was to strip out the brand, strip out the packaging, strip out everything the customer was paying for that did not actually do anything, and sell what remained. Plain packaging. No visible mark. The quality stays. The premium leaves. It became one of the most successful retail philosophies of the last half-century, and the reason is that it named something people already suspected. A very large portion of what we pay for consumer goods is not the good. Here is the American context. Somewhere around a third of what many households spend on apparel, Home goods and accessories is a brand premium rather than a difference in materials or construction. Two products come off adjacent lines in the same factory, and one costs 3 times as much because of what is printed on it. The mechanism is that a logo is a communication device, and communication devices are priced according to who is receiving the message, not what the object does. When you buy the branded version, you are buying a sentence you hope other people will say about you, and you are paying a premium for delivery. Now, the sophisticated version of this habit is the part people miss. Muji rushi is not cheapness. It is not buying the worst version. It is buying the version where every dollar went into the thing rather than into the announcement. Take a man I will call Theo. Theo made a rule 3 years ago. For any item that goes on his body or in his home, he would pay for materials and construction and refuse to pay for a visible mark. He did not buy less. He did not buy worse. He bought the unbranded version of the same category. And in several cases, the quality went up because the unbranded producers were competing on the product instead of the marketing. He estimates it saved him somewhere around $2,000 a year. Invested over 20 years at a long-run average return, that is somewhere near $90,000 from a decision he only had to make once. The American translation. Before any purchase over $100, ask one question. What am I paying for here that does not do anything? Then, find the version where that part has been removed. It exists in nearly every category, and it is nearly always cheaper. And increasingly, it is also better. The fifth habit is the natural partner to the fourth, and it fixes the mistake people make when they take the fourth one too far. Shokunin means craftsman, but the fuller idea, Shokunin kishitsu, is closer to the craftsman's spirit. It describes someone whose relationship with their work is not primarily commercial. A knife maker in their 40th year of making the same knife, refining it, taking responsibility for it. Japan takes this seriously enough that the country formally recognizes certain master artisans as living cultural treasures. For a buyer, shokunin means something specific. It means you are purchasing from someone whose reputation is attached to the object, in a way that a corporation's reputation is structurally not. The American contrast is the replacement cycle, and it is expensive in a way that hides from you. Americans discard something in the range of 70 to 80 pounds of textiles per person, per year. Furniture is routinely abandoned rather than moved. Appliances are increasingly designed with service lives measured in single-digit years. We do not buy things once. We rent them expensively and permanently. The mechanism that makes shokunin work is cost per use, and it is the single most clarifying calculation in personal finance. Take the price, estimate honestly how many times you will use the thing, and divide. A $90 pair of shoes, worn 30 times before falling apart, costs $3 every time you put them on. A $300 pair from a maker, resoled twice, worn 1,000 times over 15 years, costs 30 cents. The expensive pair was the cheap one. It just required having $300 at the moment of purchase, which is the actual reason most people never escape the cycle. Take a woman I will call Nadia. She spent years buying a new winter coat every second year, roughly $140 each time. In her 30s, she bought one properly made coat for $600 and has now worn it for 11 winters. Over 20 years, the cheap path costs her about $1,400 and delivers 10 mediocre coats. The shokunin path costs $600 and delivers one good one. The gap is not enormous in isolation, but she applied the same rule to boots, a bag, a kitchen knife, a mattress, and a coffee grinder, and across those 6 categories over 2 decades, the difference runs into the many thousands, and every single object in her life got better at the same time. The American translation. Pick 3 categories where you keep replacing things. Just 3. Buy the best-made version you can afford once, from a producer who will repair it, and stop buying that category. Then, wait 10 years before you judge whether it worked, because that is when the math arrives. The sixth habit is the most beautiful idea on this list, and it is a direct assault on the way Americans relate to imperfection. Kintsugi means golden joinery. When a ceramic bowl breaks, instead of hiding the damage or discarding the object, a craftsman rejoins the pieces with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The repair is not concealed, it is illuminated. The crack becomes a bright vein of gold running through the piece, and the object is understood to be more valuable after the break than before it. The origin story goes back to the 15th century. A shogun sent a damaged tea bowl to China for repair, and it came back stapled together with ugly metal. So Japanese craftsmen set out to develop a method of repair that was worth looking at. Now here is what this has to do with your money. The American default is that visible imperfection is a reason to replace. A scratch on a phone screen is a reason for a new phone. A scuff on a shoe is a reason for new shoes. A stain on a couch is a reason for a new couch. Not because function has been lost, but because appearance has. Americans spend an enormous amount every year in exactly the three categories that are most driven by aesthetic dissatisfaction rather than failure: apparel, home furnishings, and consumer electronics. If you reduced only the appearance-driven portion of that spending by a third, the average household would free up thousands of dollars a year without owning a single thing less. The mechanism is that Kintsugi rewrites what a mark on an object means. In the American frame, a scratch means this is degraded. In the Kintsugi frame, a scratch means this has been used, and being used is what objects are for. That is not a mind trick. It is a more accurate description of reality. Take a man I will call Carl. Carl started keeping a small box: shoe glue, a needle and thread, wood filler, a soldering iron, a tube of 2-part epoxy. Total cost, under $60. Over 4 years, he repaired a dining chair, 3 pairs of shoes, a lamp, 2 jackets, a pair of headphones, and a bookshelf. He estimates he avoided somewhere near $3,100 in replacements. But the more interesting thing he reported was that he stopped noticing the flaws. Once the mark on an object became evidence of a repair he had made, it stopped reading as damage. And there is a second-order effect here that almost nobody talks about. Once you have repaired an object with your own hands, your relationship with it changes permanently. You stop treating it as disposable because you have invested something in it that was not money. People who repair their possessions do not need discipline to keep them. They simply want to, which is why Kintsugi is not really a frugality practice at all. It is an ownership practice. The gold in the crack is a statement that this object belongs to a specific person with a specific history, rather than being one interchangeable unit pulled from a shelf. The American translation: buy the $60 repair box this week and adopt one rule with no exceptions. Nothing gets replaced for how it looks, only for what it can no longer do. The seventh habit is the one most people get backwards, because they think it is about decluttering and it is not. Danshari is written with 3 characters. Dan, refuse. Sha, dispose. Ri, separate. It was popularized in Japan around 2010 by an author named Hideko Yamashita, who drew the 3 terms from yoga philosophy. And notice the order, because the order is the entire teaching. Refuse comes first. Every decluttering movement that reached America arrived focused on the second and third characters. Get rid of things. Let go of what does not serve you. Make space. All fine, all useful. And all of it operates after the money has already been spent. Danshari's actual claim is more uncomfortable. The most important moment is not when you throw something away. It is when you decline to let it in. Here's the American picture. Storage units have become a significant industry built substantially on the overflow of ordinary households. People pay a monthly fee, indefinitely, to house objects they have already paid for and do not use. Somewhere in America right now, there is someone paying $140 a month to store furniture worth less than a year of the rent on it. The mechanism is that every object you own has an ongoing cost that is invisible at the moment of purchase. It occupies space you pay for. It requires cleaning, maintenance, moving, insuring, deciding about. Objects are not free after you buy them. They charge rent in money and in attention, and they charge it forever. Take a couple I will call the Reyeses. They adopted one rule. Nothing enters the house without a designated place it will live, decided before the purchase. Not a vague sense that it will fit somewhere, an actual named location. That single question killed roughly a third of their purchases because a startling number of things we buy have no place to go. And we discover this only after they arrive. Over 4 years, they estimated it saved them around $4,200, and they canceled a storage unit that had been running for 6 years, which by itself had cost them more than $9,000 to house things they had not looked at. The American translation. Before any non-consumable purchase, name the exact place in your home where the object will live. Say it out loud. If you cannot name it, you are not buying an object. You are buying an object plus a storage problem, and only one of those has a price tag on it. The eighth habit comes from Japanese business culture, and it is the single most protective habit on this list against expensive mistakes. Nemawashi literally means going around the roots. It comes from gardening. Before you transplant a tree, you carefully prepare the root system in the ground over time, so that when the tree is finally moved, it survives. In Japanese organizations, the word describes the quiet groundwork that happens before any formal decision. By the time a proposal reaches a meeting, the meeting is a formality. The real work happened in advance. To Western business observers, this often looks slow. It is not slow. It is front-loaded. And the outcome is that Japanese organizations tend to make decisions once, rather than making them fast and then revisiting them. Now apply that to how Americans buy things. Essentially, the entire American retail environment is engineered to produce the opposite, a decision made at the point of maximum emotional pressure and minimum information. One-click ordering, saved cards, limited time offers, countdown timers, financing offered at the register. Every element exists to compress the gap between wanting and owning to as close to zero as possible. The mechanism Nemawashi provides is friction, deliberately reinserted. And friction works because the overwhelming majority of purchase impulses are not durable. They are weather. They pass on their own if you simply refuse to act inside the window in which they are strongest. Take a man I will call Gordon. Gordon set a tiered waiting rule. Anything over $100, wait 3 days. Anything over $500, wait 2 weeks. Anything over $2,000, wait a full month and write down, in advance, the 3 specific things the purchase has to accomplish. In the first year, he tracked what happened. Of the things he waited on, a little over half he never bought at all. The desire simply dissolved without any willpower being expended, because he was not fighting it. He was outlasting it. And of the ones he did buy after waiting, he reported being significantly happier with them, because the waiting period turned a reaction into a decision. The American translation. Set the tiers today. 3 days, 2 weeks, 1 month, scaled to the amount. Delete the saved payment cards from every retailer, because that single act reinserts 30 seconds of friction, and 30 seconds is frequently enough. The point is not to be stronger than the impulse. It is to never meet it at full strength. The 9th habit is a proverb, and it explains why Japanese wealth is so much harder to see than American wealth. Deirukui wa utareru. The stake that sticks up gets hammered down. In Japan, this is generally understood as social pressure toward conformity, and it is frequently discussed as a constraint, particularly on individual ambition. It is not an unambiguously positive idea, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But applied to money specifically, it produces something the United States almost entirely lacks: a strong social norm against visible financial display. Wealth in Japan tends to be expressed through quality that only the owner can evaluate, and through the absence of signals rather than their presence. The American situation is the exact inverse, and we have built an entire economy on it. Visible consumption is not merely permitted here, it is how status gets transmitted. The car, the renovation, the vacation photographed at precisely the right angle. And here is the cost of that, in numbers. The average price paid for a new vehicle in the United States passed $50,000. The average monthly payment climbed near $770. Nearly 1 in 5 new car loans now carries a payment above $1,000 a month. Americans owe more than $1.67 trillion in auto debt alone. Very little of that is transportation. Most of it is signal. The mechanism of deru kui wa utareru is that it removes the audience from the transaction. If displaying wealth carries a mild social cost rather than a social reward, the entire calculation flips. Spending stops being a way to gain something and becomes purely an exchange of money for an object. Take a woman I will call Janelle. She earns $140,000, and almost nobody she works with knows it. She drives a 9-year-old sedan that is paid off, she does not discuss compensation, and she declines the informal competition entirely. Her colleague on the same salary is 3 years into a 7-year loan on a vehicle that signals the income accurately. Over 20 years, the difference between those two transportation approaches, invested rather than paid to a lender, runs to several $100,000. Same job, same paycheck, different audience. The American translation. Pick one category where you have been spending for other people, and be honest about which one it is. Car, home exterior, clothing, the phone. Then buy the version that serves the function, and let the signal go. Nobody is watching as closely as you think, and the people who are watching are not paying your bills. The 10th habit is the one that stops all of this from turning into a joyless life, and it is why I put it last. Ichigo ichie translates roughly as one time, one meeting. It comes from the tea ceremony tradition, and the idea is that any gathering, however ordinary, will never recur in exactly that form again. The same people, the same afternoon, the same light. This particular version happens once. The consequence is that you treat the occasion itself as the valuable thing, rather than the objects arranged around it. Now here is why this matters financially, and it is not the reason you would expect. Americans spend a great deal on entertainment, and a striking amount of it is spent on the container rather than the event, the equipment for the hobby rather than the hobby, the gear for the trip rather than the trip. Garages across the country hold the complete kit of enthusiasms that lasted 3 weekends, purchased on day 1 before anyone knew whether the enthusiasm was real. The mechanism Ichigo ichie provides is that it separates the experience from its accessories. A walk with someone you love is complete. It does not require equipment. A meal cooked together in an ordinary kitchen on a Tuesday is not a lesser version of a restaurant. It is a different thing entirely, and by this measure, it is frequently the better one, because it will not happen again either way. There is a substantial body of research suggesting that spending on experiences produces more durable satisfaction than spending on objects, largely because experiences become memories, and memories improve, while objects become normal, and normal is the death of pleasure. Take a man I will call Marcus, who I know reasonably well. Marcus and his partner cut their discretionary entertainment spending by more than half over 3 months. Not by doing less. By removing the purchase from the plan. Walking instead of driving somewhere to walk. Cooking together instead of ordering. Reading in the same room. Inviting people over instead of meeting them somewhere that charges admission. He told me the strange part was that the quality of their weekends went up. What had been getting in the way was not a lack of money. It was the logistics of spending it. The American translation. Pick one recurring social ritual and rebuild it without a transaction in the middle. 1. Keep everything else. And notice, honestly, over about a month, whether anything was actually lost. So step back and look at the 10 together, because individually, none of them is dramatic. And that is precisely the point. A cash fortress that earns almost nothing. A rule about where a bonus goes. An envelope split in half in front of a child. Refusing to pay for a logo. Buying one good coat. A $60 box of glue and thread. Naming where an object will live before you buy it. Waiting 3 days. Declining an audience. A walk instead of a purchase. Not one of these requires a raise. Not one requires investment knowledge. Not one of them would be visible to anyone watching your life from the outside. But run all 10 simultaneously for 20 years, and the arithmetic becomes genuinely difficult to argue with, because they compound against each other. The money you did not spend on the logo goes into the fortress. The fortress means you never sell at the bottom. Never selling at the bottom is what lets compounding actually finish. They are not 10 separate tactics. They are one system, and the system is older than every piece of financial technology you own. And notice what is absent from all 10. There is no market timing, no stock picking, no side hustle, no app. Nothing that requires you to be smarter or faster or luckier than anyone else. The entire system runs on decisions that happen a handful of times a year, made once, in advance, when you are calm. That is the actual Japanese insight, if there is one. Wealth is not built by people who make brilliant financial decisions. It is built by people who arrange their lives so that fewer decisions were required. Now I promised I would come back to something, and I want to be honest with you about where copying Japan directly would actually hurt you. 2 places. The first is the cash fortress, and it is important. Japan's decades of holding enormous cash balances happened during a long period of flat or falling prices. The United States is not that environment. Here, cash held over long periods reliably loses purchasing power, and it does so silently. So the American version of Chochiku has a hard ceiling. 6 months of expenses is protection. 3 years of expenses sitting in a savings account is not caution. It is a slow, guaranteed loss, and no amount of cultural admiration changes that arithmetic. Build the fortress, then stop building it and invest the rest. The second is more uncomfortable. Japan's household saving behavior has come with a genuine cost at the national level. Decades of extremely cautious consumption contributed to a long stretch of weak domestic demand. And Japanese households, by holding so little in equities, largely missed one of the greatest wealth-building runs in financial history. Caution is not free. It has its own bill, and Japan has been paying it. So take the habits, not the ideology. The 10 practices on this list are about removing waste and removing decisions. They were never an argument against investing, against growth, or against enjoying money. Anyone who tells you the answer is simply to hold cash and want less has taken a real insight and flattened it into something that will make you poorer. The habits are the useful part. The fear underneath some of them is not. But I want to be honest with you about something, because it is the part that decides whether any of this survives contact with your actual life. These 10 habits are a strategy, and a strategy always sits on top of a foundation. And if the foundation is missing, the strategy comes apart the first time something goes wrong. You can build the cash fortress, but if you do not genuinely understand how compounding works, the first time the market falls 20%, you will convince yourself that this is the exception, and you will undo a decade of discipline in a single afternoon. You can decide to send every windfall to a brokerage account. But if you have never learned the difference between an asset and a liability, between debt that builds you up and debt that quietly consumes you, you will make confident decisions that happen to be entirely wrong, and you will not find out for years. The reason so many people hear good money advice and never manage to use it is not that the advice was too complicated. It is that they were following rules they did not actually understand. And rules you do not understand fall apart in your hands the moment life gets complicated. Understanding is what turns a fragile rule into a habit that holds. You can see this everywhere once you know to look. Two people read exactly the same advice about investing early. A year later, one of them has an account they barely think about, and the other pulled everything out in a panic, locked in the loss, and decided the whole thing was rigged. The advice was identical. What separated them was whether they understood what they were doing and why. So if anything here landed, the most valuable next step is not to go buy a repair kit. It is to make sure you genuinely understand the fundamentals underneath all of it. That is exactly why this channel has a full breakdown of financial literacy, built as the real starting point before you make a single major decision. Go back to that Friday afternoon and the $6,200. I understand now that nothing unusual happened to that money. It was not wasted in any dramatic way. There was no moment of weakness I could point to and regret. It was simply absorbed, quietly, by a life that had no structure in place to stop it, because nobody ever taught me that structure was the thing that mattered. That is the difference the whole video comes down to. It was never that Japanese households earn more, because they do not. It was never that they are more disciplined, because discipline runs out in every country. It is that they inherited 10 small pieces of architecture that make the right thing happen by default, so that willpower never has to be involved. You can install the same architecture starting this week. It will not feel like much while you are doing it. That is what makes it work. And in 20 years, you will be sitting on something you cannot picture right now, built entirely out of decisions nobody watching your life would have noticed you making. That is the quiet part. It was always the quiet part.